Ethan Ward woke up long before sunrise, like he did every morning. His small ranch sat on dry land at the edge of the quiet western town, and every day felt heavier than the last. His father had died 2 years earlier, leaving Ethan with debts he had never expected. The fields were dry, the cattle were fewer, and the bank letters grew sharper each month. But Ethan was stubborn. He refused to let the ranch fall apart. It was the only thing his father left him, the only thing that made him feel rooted in a world that kept changing too fast. He pulled on his old boots, brushed dust from his jeans, and stepped outside. The morning wind was cold, sharp, and empty. He saddled his horse and rode out toward the broken fence line he needed to repair. If he didn't fix it, the remaining cattle might wander off, and losing even one cow would hurt him more than he could bear. While he worked, hammering wooden posts into the dry soil, he heard footsteps approaching from the direction of the town road. They were soft, slow, and uncertain. When he turned, he saw a woman standing there, her hands folded nervously in front of her. She had gray hair tied back neatly, a long dress that brushed the dust, and a face lined with years of quiet hardship. She was about 60, though something about her eyes made her look even older, like she had carried too many hidden stories for too long. "Are you Ethan Ward?" she asked, in a gentle voice. "Yes, ma'am," he said, removing his hat politely. "What can I do for you?" The woman took a breath, as if she had rehearsed something many times but still wasn't ready to say it. "My name is Helen Crane. I live just outside town, near the old cottonwood grove. My barn roof, well, it's fallen in. I've heard you take odd jobs." Ethan nodded. He took every job he could find these days. "Yes, ma'am. I can come look at it this afternoon." Her shoulders relaxed a little, like she wasn't used to people agreeing with her so easily. "Thank you," she whispered. Then she hesitated, almost embarrassed. "I can pay fair. I don't want charity." "I never ask for charity," Ethan said with a small smile. "I'll see what I can do." Helen nodded, thanked him again, and walked away quietly. Ethan watched her go, noticing something unusual. She walked like someone who had lived her whole life, without leaning on anyone. Later that day, when Ethan arrived at her property, he was surprised. Her house was old but clean, with white curtains and a small garden carefully kept alive despite the dry weather. The barn, however, looked like it had lost its battle with time years ago. Helen stepped out from the house, wiping her hands on her apron. "I made some tea, if you want." Ethan didn't usually accept drinks while working, but something about Helen's careful politeness made him nod. She led him to the porch, poured him a cup, and sat across from him like someone trying hard not to look lonely. As they talked, Ethan learned small things about her. She had lived on this land all her life. She had no siblings. Her parents had been sick for many years, and she had cared for them until their last days. She never married, never traveled, never tried to build anything for herself. Life had passed her by while she stayed home tending others. "What about now?" Ethan asked softly. She shook her head. "Now I fix what I can, stay quiet, and hope the winters don't get harder." Ethan didn't know what to say. Something in her voice felt like a window into a life lived in silence. When he examined the barn, he realized it might take 3 or 4 days to repair. He told her the cost would be fair, much less than what town carpenters would charge. Helen looked down at her hands, as if ashamed. "I'm glad. I don't like asking people for help. I know I'm not important." "You're important enough," Ethan replied without thinking. Her eyes lifted to his, surprised. Most people didn't speak kindly to her. She was used to being ignored. Over the next few days, Ethan worked on her barn from sunrise to sunset. Helen would bring him water, sometimes biscuits, always shy and quiet. She watched him work from a distance, as if studying a person she had never thought she would meet, someone who listened, someone who didn't dismiss her. One evening, As the sun dipped behind the hills and the sky turned orange, Ethan finished the last beam and climbed down. Helen stood there, holding a small basket of food she had cooked for him. "It's nothing special," she said quickly, as if apologizing. "It's more than I expected," he replied. They sat on the porch to eat. The evening was peaceful, and a soft breeze brushed the trees. Helen seemed nervous, like she wanted to say something but wasn't sure how. "Ethan," she said finally, "may I ask you something very personal?" "Of course," he answered. She looked down, trying to gather courage. Then she whispered, with a voice trembling like she feared the world's judgment, "Have you ever considered marriage?" Ethan almost dropped his spoon. "Marriage? Me?" He let out a short laugh. "Ma'am, I can hardly feed myself some days." Helen nodded, her expression tight. "I see." There was a long silence. Ethan felt guilty. He hadn't meant to sound unkind. "Why do you ask?" he said softly. Helen breathed deeply, her shoulders trembling. She lifted her eyes, and they were full of emotion, fear, and something like desperation. "Because," she whispered, "I'm 60 years old. I have never married. I have never been with anyone. I have lived alone all my life. And now, when I look at the years left ahead of me, I am frightened. I don't want to leave this world without knowing companionship. Not romance, not youth, just a partner, somebody who will stay. Somebody who will look at me and say, 'I matter.'" Ethan felt a knot in his chest. He had never heard anyone speak with such raw honesty. Helen swallowed hard and then said the words that froze Ethan's breath. "I'm a virgin. Please marry me." Ethan stared at her, unable to speak. The words were simple, but the pain behind them filled the evening air like heavy fog. Helen wasn't saying it for attention. She wasn't asking out of foolishness or fantasy. She was asking out of deep loneliness, out of a lifetime of being unseen. She hurried on, afraid he would misunderstand. "Not because I want anything improper. That's not what I mean. I want a partner. A home where two people take care of each other. I have savings. I have this land. You have a ranch that needs help. Maybe we can help each other." Bowed. Her hands shook as she spoke. She wasn't embarrassed about her age. She was embarrassed she had no one. Ethan's heart felt heavy. He looked at her, not at her wrinkles or her gray hair, but at her bravery. It took enormous courage for a woman like her, who had lived silently for decades, to speak such a truth. He didn't answer right away. He couldn't. The idea felt too big, too sudden. But he didn't walk away. He didn't laugh. He didn't dismiss her. Instead, he sat quietly, watching the fading sunlight paint golden lines across the porch. Helen waited, her breath tight, her eyes full of fear. "Ma'am," he said finally, "I need time to think." Helen nodded quickly, trying to hide the hurt in her face. "You have nothing to be sorry for," Ethan said softly. She stood, whispering, "Thank you for listening," and walked toward the house with slow, quiet steps, as if she expected the world to collapse behind her. Ethan watched her go, his mind spinning. He had never felt such a mix of shock, compassion, and responsibility. Her request wasn't childish. It wasn't strange. It was the most honest plea he had ever heard. That night, Ethan lay awake in his small ranch house, staring at the ceiling. The wind howled outside, dust blowing against the windows. He thought of Helen, her shy smile, her lonely eyes, her trembling voice asking for something simple yet life-changing. She wasn't asking for youth. She wasn't asking for beauty or excitement. She was asking for a chance at a normal life, something everyone else took for granted. A home, a partner, a sense of belonging. Ethan realized something important. Her words had touched him, because he understood loneliness too. He had lived it for years, burying it under work and exhaustion. As the night stretched on, he kept hearing her voice, soft and fearful. "Please marry me." And he knew he couldn't ignore it. Ethan woke up the next morning feeling heavier than usual. The sunlight came through the window, soft and warm, but it didn't ease the weight on his mind. Helen's trembling voice echoed in his thoughts again and again, like a quiet wind returning every time he tried to push it away. "I'm a virgin. Please marry me." No one had ever spoken to him with such vulnerability. No one had ever trusted him with such a personal truth. Ethan wasn't a man who lived with pride or glory. He was just a struggling cowboy, trying to survive each day. Yet Helen had looked at him as if he was the only person in the world who might understand her. He washed his face, put on his dusty shirt, and stepped outside. The air was cool, and his empty ranch felt even lonelier today. The barns, the fences, the half-dry fields, everything reminded him that he was holding on by a thin thread. His father used to say that a man could fight the world alone, but sometimes the world hit harder than expected. As Ethan saddled his horse, he found himself thinking not just about his troubles, but about Helen's household, the clean porch, the carefully tended garden, the silent rooms that had never held laughter or shared meals. She had lived her entire life with people depending on her, yet no one had ever been there for her. She had cared for her sick parents for decades, sacrificing her own chances of happiness, companionship, or marriage. And when her parents passed, the world forgot she existed at all. Ethan wasn't sure what he should do. But he knew one thing. He couldn't ignore her. She had trusted him enough to show her deepest loneliness. He owed her more than silence. He rode to her property slowly, thinking through every possibility. He didn't want to make a promise he couldn't keep. He didn't want Helen to feel like a burden. But he also couldn't pretend he wasn't touched by her honesty. When he reached her house, Helen was sitting on the porch, hands wrapped tightly around a cup of tea. She straightened immediately when she saw him, fear flickering in her eyes as if she expected bad news. "Good morning," Ethan said gently. She nodded, trying to smile but failing. "Good morning. I wasn't sure you would come today." "I said I needed to think," he replied quietly, stepping onto the porch. "I didn't say I'd disappear." Helen looked down, embarrassed. "I know. I didn't sleep well." Ethan sat across from her. He didn't rush. He let the quiet settle between them because he knew she needed time to breathe. "Helen," he began. "What you told me yesterday, that was brave." Her hands shook slightly. "I didn't mean to frighten you." "You didn't frighten me," he said. "You surprised me. That's all." She nodded slowly, still unable to meet his eyes. Ethan leaned forward, speaking carefully. "I want to understand everything before I make any decision." Helen looked at him, then really looked, and he saw the fear she had been hiding. Not fear of rejection, but fear of being seen as foolish. She took a slow breath. "I have lived inside this house for most of my life. When my parents fell ill, I took care of them. That was my duty, and I don't regret it. But years passed, and I forgot to think about myself. I forgot to wish for anything." Ethan listened quietly. "When they were gone," she continued softly, "I thought I would finally start living. But by then, I was old. The world doesn't look at women my age. People see me as a shadow, someone who doesn't belong anywhere." Her voice trembled as she spoke, but she continued, determined to finish. "I don't want to die alone, Ethan. I don't want to leave this world without ever knowing what it feels like to have a partner, someone who asks how my day was, someone who sits with me at supper, someone who sees me as a person, not as a forgotten woman." She paused, tears gathering in her eyes. She quickly wiped them away, embarrassed. "I'm not asking you for romance or youth. I'm asking for companionship, a peaceful home, a shared life. I know I'm not young. I know I'm not beautiful. But I have my land, my savings, my heart, and everything I never gave to anyone. I want to give that to a partner before it's too late. Ethan felt his chest tighten. Her words were honest, simple, and full of pain. She wasn't offering a bargain. She was offering her entire life, her trust, and her hope. He spoke carefully. Helen, why me? She looked at him with soft eyes filled with sincerity. Because you are kind. You listen. You don't treat people like they're worthless. You respect everyone, even strangers. And you take responsibility, even when it's hard. You're a good man, Ethan. That's all I ever wanted. Ethan felt a warmth in his chest. A feeling he hadn't let himself feel in years. Someone believed in him, not because of what he owned, or what he looked like, or what he could offer, but because of who he was. He sat back, running his hand through his hair. I won't lie, Helen. My ranch is struggling. I'm running out of ways to save it. Helen nodded gently. I know. I heard things in town. People talk. They don't mean harm, but they talk. So, you know, I don't have much to offer. You have enough, she said softly. You have a heart that doesn't quit. For a long moment, Ethan didn't speak. He simply let her words settle in the space between them. He realized something important. Helen wasn't looking for a man to save her. She was looking for someone she could trust. And she saw that in him. Finally, he said the sentence that made her eyes widen. If we married, would you be happy with a simple life? Nothing fancy. Just honest days and quiet evenings. Helen covered her mouth, unable to answer at first. When she finally spoke, her voice was full of emotion. Ethan, a simple life is all I've ever wanted. He nodded slowly, as if weighing his final doubts. Then, he looked directly into her eyes, letting her see his decision. Helen, if we do this, we do it today. Before either of us loses courage. Her breath caught. Today? Today, he confirmed. If we're making a home together, there's no point waiting. Helen stood still, frozen, and then her eyes filled with tears she didn't try to hide. She placed her trembling hands on her chest, whispering, Ethan, I don't know what to say. You already said enough, he replied softly. He stood and held out his hand, not as a lover, not as a rescuer, but as a partner. Helen slowly placed her hand in his, her fingers delicate and shaking. She wasn't trembling from fear now. She was trembling because she had been given something she never expected a chance. They walked together toward the horse, and Ethan helped her up gently before climbing behind her. She held onto the saddle with both hands, afraid of slipping. And Ethan steadied her, without making her feel weak. As they rode toward town, people stared, some curious, some puzzled, some whispering. But neither Ethan nor Helen looked away. They rode with quiet determination. Two lonely souls who had decided to build something new together. At the courthouse, the clerk blinked in surprise. You two want to marry today? Yes, Ethan said simply. Helen nodded, her cheeks flushed with emotion. The clerk looked at them for a moment, then softened. Very well. Let me get the papers. As they signed the forms, Helen's hand shook so much that Ethan gently steadied it with his own. She looked at him, eyes full of gratitude that went beyond words. When the simple ceremony was done, the clerk congratulated them with genuine warmth. Ethan turned to Helen and offered her a small, calm smile. We're partners now. Helen pressed a hand to her heart. Thank you for not letting me face the rest of my life alone. You won't ever be alone again, Ethan said quietly. They stepped outside into the warm afternoon. There was no music, no celebration, no cheering crowd. Just the two of them standing under the wide western sky, bound not by age or youth, but by courage and trust. And in that moment, their new life began. The first morning after their marriage felt strange for both Ethan and Helen, but not in a bad way. It was simply new. It was a feeling neither of them had experienced before. When Ethan stepped out of the small spare room Helen had prepared for him, he found her already awake, standing in the kitchen with a quiet expression, as if she wasn't sure what a married woman was supposed to look like. She was stirring something in a pot, but her hands trembled slightly. "You didn't have to cook so early," Ethan said softly from the doorway. Helen turned quickly, surprised, then gave a shy smile. "Old habits. I've been waking up before dawn my whole life." He nodded. "Me too." They shared a small laugh, gentle and natural, and it broke the morning's tension. Ethan helped set the table, even though Helen tried to stop him. She wasn't used to someone working beside her. She had spent many years doing everything alone. He wasn't used to help either. They were two people who had lived separately for so long that even the simplest teamwork felt new. When they sat down to eat, the silence wasn't awkward, it was soft, warm. Ethan noticed how Helen kept glancing at him shyly, like she needed to make sure he was really there. Helen, on the other hand, noticed how Ethan ate quietly, calmly, as if he was trying not to disturb her home. Neither wanted to make the other uncomfortable. After breakfast, Ethan walked the property to understand what needed attention. Helen followed a few steps behind, unsure if she should stay close or give him space. Ethan finally stopped and looked at her. "Helen," he said, "you don't need to walk behind me. You can walk with me." Her cheeks warmed with embarrassment. "I didn't want to get in your way." "You're not in the way," he said. "We're together now." She nodded, touched by the simple words. Throughout the morning, Ethan took notes on the repairs needed. Helen's house had been well cared for but still had small problems. Loose shutters, broken fence rails, an old water pump that squeaked loudly. The barn he fixed earlier now stood strong, but the coop needed new boards, and the horse trough needed cleaning. Ethan wasn't overwhelmed, he was grateful. Working gave him purpose, and Helen appreciated every effort with a softness he hadn't felt in years. Every time he hammered a nail or lifted a board, she brought water or smiled shyly, like she was witnessing something important. By noon, Ethan returned to the porch to rest. Helen handed him a glass of cool water. "You work too hard," she whispered. He shook his head. "This isn't hard. Hard is fighting storms alone. Hard is feeling like no one needs you. Hard is fighting no one needs you." Helen slowly sat down beside him. The breeze played with her gray hair, making her look peaceful and gentle. "Ethan," she said carefully, "I want you to know, you don't owe me anything. I asked you to marry me because I was lonely, because I wanted a home, but I don't want you to feel trapped." Her voice trembled, as if she expected him to regret everything. Ethan turned toward her. "Helen, I don't feel trapped. I feel needed, and that's something I haven't felt in a long time." Helen's eyes glistened. She looked down at her hands to hide her emotion. No one had ever told her she made a difference. Later in the afternoon, Ethan rode to the town with a list of supplies. News of his sudden marriage had spread quickly. As he stepped inside the general store, people turned to stare. Some whispered. Some smiled awkwardly. Some of the younger men smirked, but Ethan ignored them. Old Mrs. Hargrove, the shopkeeper, approached him immediately. "Ethan Ward," she said in a warm voice. "I heard you married Helen Crane." "Yes, ma'am," he responded calmly. She gave a slow, approving nod. "Good woman. That one. Heart made of gold. Been alone too long." Ethan smiled. "I know." She leaned closer. "Don't mind the gossip. Folks around here talk because they've got nothing else to do." Ethan appreciated her kindness. He finished his shopping and headed back. When he returned home, he saw Helen standing near the garden, waiting for him. She tried to look normal, but it was clear she had been anxious the entire time he was gone. She had never had someone who returned to her, someone she waited for, someone she worried about. This feeling was new and strange, but she didn't hate it. "You bought everything?" she asked softly. "Yes," he said, "and I got extra boards for the fence. You didn't have to spend." "Helen," he interrupted gently, "we're building this home together." She blinked quickly, touched once again. As the days passed, they slowly settled into married life. Not rushed, not forced, but steady and natural. Ethan repaired the coop, fixed the window frames, and trimmed the old trees. Helen cooked meals, cleaned, and tended the garden. But the most beautiful change was the one happening quietly, how they began to open up to each other. In the evenings, they would sit on the porch, drinking tea while the sun faded behind the hills. Helen shared stories she had never told anyone, how she used to draw with her mother, how she wished she could have traveled, how she once dreamed of being a schoolteacher. Ethan listened without judgment, fascinated by the life she kept hidden for decades. He told her about his father's ranch, the long nights he spent alone, the struggles no one knew about. Helen listened with deep understanding. She never gave unwanted advice. She simply let him speak, something no one had done for him in years. One evening, they watched fireflies dance above the grass. Helen turned to Ethan, her voice cautious. "Do you ever regret marrying me?" Ethan didn't hesitate. "No, not at all." She breathed out, relieved, as if she had been holding that question for days. "You're kind," she whispered. "Kinder than I deserve." "You deserve kindness, Helen," he said. "Everyone does." Her eyes shimmered again. She had spent so many years believing she was invisible that hearing someone say she deserved kindness felt strange, almost unbelievable. Over time, their routines intertwined naturally. Ethan started leaving small things repaired that Helen hadn't asked him to fix. Helen began leaving fresh biscuits on the counter for him to find after hard work. They didn't talk about these acts, they simply became habits of care. One afternoon, Ethan found an old rocking chair on the porch that Helen had carefully polished and repaired herself. "It was my mother's," she said. "I thought maybe you'd like to sit there after work." Ethan ran his hand over the smooth wood. "Thank you, Helen. It's beautiful." The simple exchange warmed her heart. But life wasn't free from challenges. A few townspeople whispered rude comments about their marriage, mostly about the age difference. Helen heard some of it when she went to buy flour. It hurt her far more than she shared. That evening, she sat quietly at the table, pushing her supper around her plate. Ethan noticed immediately. "What's wrong?" he asked gently. She hesitated, then sighed. "People in town. They said things. About us. They said you married me for my land." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Do you believe that?" "No," she said quickly, shaking her head. "No. Ethan, I don't. I'm just not used to being talked about." He reached across the table and placed his hand on hers. "Helen, listen to me. I'm not ashamed of our marriage. And I don't care what anyone says." Her lips trembled. "I just want you to be proud of the home we're building." "I am," he said firmly. "I'm proud of you. Proud of us." Helen covered her mouth, trying not to cry. No one had ever spoken to her like that. After that day, Ethan made a point to stand beside her whenever they went into town. He didn't do it loudly or dramatically. He simply walked next to her, spoke kindly to her, and treated her as his partner. Slowly, people noticed. Slowly, the whispers softened. Days turned into weeks, and their home became a place where loneliness no longer lived. They ate together, worked together, rested together, and learned each other's habits. Sometimes they spoke for hours. Sometimes they sat quietly, comforted simply by each other's presence. Helen became gentler with herself. She stopped apologizing for every small mistake. She stopped shrinking in fear when someone looked at her. Ethan became calmer, steadier. He slept more peacefully, He smiled more often. They were not a typical couple. They were not young. They were not perfect. But they were kind. And they were learning how to build a life not made of passion or excitement, but of trust, comfort, and shared purpose. One night, as they sat on the porch watching the stars, Helen whispered. He looked at her, peaceful and sincere. Helen, you gave me one too. And with that simple truth, their quiet, meaningful life continued to grow, softly, steadily, beautifully. The months after Ethan and Helen's marriage passed in a slow, peaceful rhythm, the kind that settles deep into a home and makes everything feel steady. What began as a simple agreement between two lonely people was now shaping into a life built on understanding, patience, and quiet care. Ethan had never imagined that a home could feel so calm, and Helen had never imagined that someone would choose to stay beside her every day without being asked. The seasons gradually changed. The hot winds of summer softened, the evenings grew cooler, and the sky turned copper-colored earlier each day. Ethan spent long hours strengthening the ranch, repairing old parts of the barn, adding safe fencing for the cattle, and making sure the land could survive winter. Helen always prepared warm meals for him, set out water when he worked outdoors, and often sat nearby with sewing or reading, just so he wouldn't feel alone. But even with the peaceful days, the world still had challenges waiting. One night, in early autumn, dark thunderclouds built up on the horizon. Ethan could smell the rain before it arrived. The wind grew stronger, carrying dust and loose leaves across the ranch. Ethan stepped outside, tightening the rope on the gate. Helen joined him on the porch, her shawl wrapped tight around her shoulders. She watched the sky with worry in her eyes. Storms had always frightened her since she lived alone for so long. But now, she wasn't alone. Will it be bad? She asked softly. Hard to tell, Ethan said, gently touching her shoulder. But we'll be all right. She nodded, trusting him. Together they went inside and prepared lanterns, blankets, and warm food. Ethan checked the doors and windows twice before sitting beside her near the fire. But the first gust of wind hit hard, much stronger than expected. The house shook slightly, and Helen jumped. Ethan placed a hand over hers. I'm right here. Thunder rolled across the sky, loud and deep, like mountains breaking. Rain followed quickly, lashing against the windows with force. The wind howled around the house, bending trees and shaking loose branches. Helen tried to stay calm, but her breath trembled. She wasn't afraid of danger, she was afraid of losing something she just gained. Ethan sensed her fear and stayed close beside her, holding her hand each time the thunder cracked. When another strong gust hit, Ethan stood suddenly. I need to check the barn. Animals might be scared. Helen grabbed his arm instantly. Please, please be careful. I will, he said gently. I promise. He put on his coat and stepped into the storm. Rain hit him hard, soaking him within seconds. But he didn't slow down. The barn door slammed wildly in the wind, and he fought it shut. Inside, the animals were restless, stomping and shifting nervously. Ethan calmed them one by one, speaking softly, checking their stalls, making sure none were hurt. When he returned to the porch, he found Helen waiting with a towel, her hands shaking. You shouldn't have stood out here, he said. I couldn't sit inside without knowing you were safe, she whispered. He smiled and wiped the rain from his face. I'm all right. The animals, too. The storm raged for hours. They sat together, huddled near the warm fire, listening to the wind and rain crash against the house. Helen leaned her head gently on Ethan's shoulder. He didn't move away. Instead, he placed a steady arm around her back. This storm will pass, he whispered. She nodded. It feels easier because you're here. He felt those words settle deeply inside him. Years of loneliness had hardened him, but Helen's quiet honesty softened something he didn't know had survived. By morning, the storm had passed, leaving broken branches and muddy ground everywhere. The sky was clear again, glowing with soft gold light. Ethan stepped outside early to check the damage. The fence needed repair. Several trees had fallen, and the water trough had flipped over. But nothing was beyond fixing. Helen came out with a cup of warm tea. "Is everything ruined?" she asked, nervously. "Nothing we can't handle together," Ethan replied. That "together" made her smile gently. Over the next 2 days, neighbors from surrounding ranches showed up to help each other, as people often did after a storm. Ethan helped his neighbors fix roofs and move fallen trees, while others came to help him straighten the broken fence and lift heavy logs. For the first time, people began to see Ethan and Helen as a true pair, not a strange couple, not an unusual match, but a team. Some villagers who once whispered now greeted Helen with gentle smiles. A few even told her she had handled the storm bravely. Ethan noticed how Helen's face lit up at each small kindness. She wasn't used to being seen. He felt grateful that people were finally treating her with the respect she always deserved. One evening, after a long day of cleaning up storm damage, Ethan and Helen sat on the porch watching the sunset. Helen held a small folded paper in her hand. She looked hesitant. "What's that?" Ethan asked. She unfolded it slowly. "It's a letter I wrote years ago. To myself. I found it while cleaning the drawer today." "What does it say?" Helen's eyes softened. "It says I hope one day I won't be alone anymore." Ethan swallowed, moved by the quiet confession. "And now?" She looked at him, her eyes warm and full. "Now I'm not alone." Ethan nodded. "Neither am I." As the sun dipped behind the hills, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, something inside Helen changed. She always walked with a slight hesitation, her shoulders curved inward, as if protecting herself from invisible judgment. But now, she sat straighter, her hands steady. She wasn't the same woman who whispered her fears at night. She was growing confident in the place she had earned. The town slowly began realizing that their marriage wasn't rushed or odd. It was honest, genuine, a partnership built on kindness, not convenience. When Ethan took Helen to the town fair, people greeted her with warmth instead of shock. Helen's face glowed with shy pride when Ethan introduced her to others as his wife. Later in the year, when winter came, their partnership became even stronger. Ethan chopped firewood, while Helen sewed quilts and cooked hearty meals. They spent long evenings talking. Sometimes Helen told stories from her childhood, stories she never shared with anyone before. Ethan shared memories of his father, how he taught him to rope cattle and fix broken walls. One snowy night, Helen surprised Ethan by placing a handmade scarf around his neck. "You made this?" Ethan asked, stunned. "I wanted to give you something," she said shyly. "Something that keeps you warm when you work outside." Ethan touched the scarf gently. "Helen, no one has made something for me in years." She smiled softly. Then, it was about time. Each day made their bond stronger. Every season brought a new layer of trust, comfort, and purpose. One morning in early spring, Sheriff Dalton rode up to Ethan's ranch. He needed help rescuing some trapped cattle near the river after heavy rain. Ethan immediately saddled his horse and went. Helen watched from the porch, worry mixed with pride. She wasn't scared like before. She trusted Ethan's strength and goodness. She knew he wasn't only her husband, he was someone who helped anyone in need without thinking twice. When Ethan returned hours later, tired and muddy, a group of townspeople followed him to thank him. They all greeted Helen as well. "Your husband saved half the herd," one rancher said kindly. "Good man. You've got there." Helen smiled, warmth filling her heart. For the first time, she felt completely accepted, not as an old, unnoticed woman, but as a partner in a strong, respected marriage. That evening, Ethan sat with her on the steps and looked at the horizon turning quiet blue. "We did good today," he said. You did, she answered softly. No, he corrected gently. We did. This home, this life, everything is stronger. Because we built it together. Helen's eyes filled with soft tears, not sad ones, but grateful ones. Ethan, she whispered, you changed my life. I thought my story was over, but you gave me a new one. Ethan took her hand with a calm, steady warmth. Helen, you changed mine too. I was drowning before you came. I had nothing to hold on to. You gave me a reason to stand tall again. They sat quietly for a long time, letting the cool breeze pass between them. Their marriage had not been born from passion or youth. It had been born from honesty, loneliness, kindness, and courage. And it had grown into something strong, stable, and beautiful. In town, people would soon speak of their story as one worth remembering, not because it was dramatic or glamorous, but because it was real. Two souls who had lost hope found comfort in each other. Two people who felt invisible built a life that shone quietly and steadily. The struggling cowboy who once fought alone, and the 60-year-old bride who once felt forgotten, now lived a life where neither had to face a single day without love, respect, and companionship. Their story became a small legend in the valley, a gentle reminder that sometimes the simplest matches create the strongest homes. And together, Ethan and Helen walked through every season, hand in hand, grateful that fate had brought them together on a quiet day, when one lonely woman gathered her courage and whispered the truth that changed both their lives forever.